She wore her wedding dress to the memorial service. They laughed until a little girl whispered, "You're beautiful." Montana Territory, autumn of 1883. The church bells rang slow and mournful across the valley. Each chime carried the weight of names spoken too often that year. Men lost to fever, children taken by winter, mothers buried beneath stones too new to bear moss. Inside the white chapel the pews were packed. Shoulders touched, breaths mingled. The air smelled of damp wool and sorrow. And then the door opened. Martha Ellison stepped inside. Silence fell like a curtain drop. She wore ivory satin. The dress was old, yellowed at the seams, tight across her chest and hips. The fabric strained with each step. Her gloved hands clutched a single white lily, and her face, round and flushed, was set with quiet determination. She had worn this dress once before, on her wedding day, 3 years ago, when James Ellison had taken her hand and promised forever. Forever lasted 11 months. Now she walked down the aisle of that same chapel, alone, carrying a flower for a man no one else remembered to honor. Whispers began. "Is that her wedding dress? Lord have mercy, look at the size of her." A woman in the third pew snorted. "Too loud, too cruel." "Well," the woman said, voice dripping with mockery, "who's going to tell her she's not pretty anymore?" Laughter rippled through the rows, soft at first, then bolder. Heads turned. Eyes judged. Martha felt every stare like a brand on her skin. Her throat tightened. Her hands trembled, but she did not stop walking. She reached the front of the chapel, where a table held photographs of the dead. Men in uniform. Women in shawls. Children with blank faces. She laid the lily beside James's photograph, a young man with kind eyes and a crooked smile, the only man who had ever called her beautiful without flinching. Behind her the whispers grew louder. "She's making a spectacle. Poor thing doesn't know when to let go." Martha's vision blurred. Her chest ached. She turned slowly, facing the crowd. Every face stared back, some pitying, some cruel, none kind. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. So she walked. Back down the aisle. Past the whispers. Past the laughter. Past the people who had once smiled at her wedding and now sneered at her grief. She pushed through the chapel doors and stepped into the cold autumn air. The wind slapped her face. Dust swirled around her boots. She stumbled down the wooden steps, her dress catching on a nail. The seam tore. She didn't care. She reached the edge of the churchyard and stopped. Her hands pressed against her face. Her shoulders shook. "I saw what they did." The voice was low, steady. "Male." Martha froze. She turned slowly. A man stood in the shadow of the church, leaning against the oak post. His hat was pulled low, his coat dusty, his face weathered by sun and wind. Daniel Hayes. Everyone knew him. Widowed 3 years ago, raised his daughter alone, kept to himself, never came to town unless he had to. Martha's breath caught. "I don't need your pity." "I'm not offering any," Daniel said quietly. She blinked. "Then why are you here?" "Because I know what it's like," he said, "to be reminded you're alone." His words hit harder than the laughter had. Martha looked down. Her hands twisted the torn fabric of her dress. "They think I'm foolish, wearing this, coming here." "Maybe," Daniel said. "But you came anyway." She looked up. His eyes were gray, calm, unreadable. Not mocking, not pitying, just present. "I wanted to honor him," Martha whispered. "James, he was kind to me." Daniel nodded once. "Then you did right." A small voice broke the silence. "Papa?" A little girl appeared from behind Daniel's leg. She was small, maybe 7 years old. Her dress was clean but patched, her hair braided neatly, her eyes wide and curious. "Emily Hayes." The child looked at Martha. Then she stepped forward, barefoot on the cold ground. "You're pretty," Emily said simply. Martha's breath hitched, her eyes burned. She knelt slowly, bringing herself level with the girl. "What did you say?" Martha asked, voice trembling. Emily smiled. "I said you're pretty, like the snow on the mountains." Martha pressed a hand to her mouth. A sob broke free. Not from pain, from something she'd forgotten existed. Kindness. Daniel stepped forward and placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Emily, we should go." But Emily didn't move. She reached out and touched the torn fabric of Martha's dress. "Did you rip it?" Martha nodded, unable to speak. Papa can fix it, Emily said brightly. He fixes everything. Daniel cleared his throat. His cheeks flushed slightly. I'm not a seamstress. But you fixed my doll, Emily insisted. Despite everything, Martha laughed. A real laugh, short and broken, but real. Daniel met her eyes. Something passed between them. Not love, not yet, but recognition. Come on, Emily, Daniel said gently. Wait, Martha said. She reached into her coat and pulled out a handkerchief. Plain, worn, but clean. She handed it to Emily. For being kind. Emily took it carefully. Thank you, miss. Martha, she said softly. My name is Martha. Daniel tipped his hat. Ma'am. Then he turned, taking Emily's hand, and they walked toward a wagon parked near the fence. Martha watched them go. The wind tugged at her dress. The chapel doors opened behind her, releasing voices and footsteps. For the first time in 3 years, someone had looked at her and seen something other than shame. And that little girl's voice echoed in her mind. You're pretty. That night Martha sat by her small fireplace, mending the torn seam of her dress. The needle moved slowly. The dress lay across her lap like a ghost. A knock sounded at the door. Martha froze. No one visited her, not anymore. She opened it cautiously. A small basket sat on the porch. No one in sight. Inside were fresh eggs, a jar of honey and a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it with trembling hands. The handwriting was careful, childish. For the pretty lady. From Emily. Martha pressed the note to her chest. Her eyes burned. And for the first time since James died, she smiled. The next morning Martha woke to the sound of a wagon rolling up the dirt path to her cabin. She peered through the window, squinting against the early sun. Daniel Hayes sat in the driver's seat, reins loose in his hands. Emily bounced beside him, waving enthusiastically. Martha's heart stuttered. She looked down at herself, still in her nightdress, hair undone, face unwashed. She hurried to make herself presentable, splashing cold water on her cheeks, braiding her hair with shaking fingers. By the time she opened the door, Daniel had already dismounted. Morning, ma'am, he said, hat in hand. Mr. Hayes, Martha replied, voice uncertain. Is something wrong? No, ma'am, Daniel said. Just thought you might need some help with that fence out back. Saw it leaning when I passed by last week. Martha blinked. You came to fix my fence? If you'll allow it. She didn't know what to say. No one had offered to help her with anything in over a year. The townspeople had decided she was capable enough to manage alone, or maybe they just didn't care. Yes, Martha said finally. Thank you. Emily jumped down from the wagon and ran straight to Martha, throwing her arms around her waist. I brought you something. The little girl held up a cloth bundle. Martha took it carefully and unfolded it. Inside were 3 biscuits, still warm. Papa made them, Emily said proudly. But I helped. Martha's throat tightened. They're beautiful. Try one, Emily insisted. Martha bit into a biscuit. It was buttery, flaky, perfect. She hadn't tasted anything this good since James died. Her own cooking had become functional, joyless. It's delicious, Martha said softly. Emily beamed. Daniel's ears turned slightly pink. Well, he said, clearing his throat, I'll get to work on that fence. He walked around the side of the cabin, tool belt slung over his shoulder. Emily stayed with Martha, chattering about the chickens on their ranch, about a calf that had been born last week, about how Papa let her name it Buttercup even though it was a boy. Martha listened, smiling despite herself. Emily's joy was infectious, unfiltered, pure. After a while, Martha went inside and made coffee. She brought a cup out to Daniel, who was already sweating in the morning heat, hammering new posts into place. Thank you, ma'am, he said, accepting the cup. Martha, she corrected gently. Please, just Martha. Daniel nodded. Daniel. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Martha said, You didn't have to do this. I know. Then why? Daniel set down the coffee cup and picked up another post. Because you shouldn't have to do everything alone. His words settled over her like a blanket. Warm. Unexpected. People in town don't think that way, Martha said quietly. People in town talk too much, Daniel replied. Martha almost smiled. Almost. By midday the fence was sturdy again. Daniel packed his tools while Emily helped Martha water the small vegetable garden behind the cabin. The rows were sparse, neglected. Martha hadn't had the heart to tend them properly. But Emily knelt in the dirt without hesitation, her small hands gentle as she poured water around the wilting tomato plants. "They're thirsty," Emily said. "Like me when I run too much." Martha knelt beside her. "You're right. I haven't been taking care of them." "That's okay," Emily said. "Papa says sometimes we forget things when we're sad." Martha's breath caught. She looked at the little girl, so wise beyond her years. "Your papa is a smart man," Martha whispered. Emily nodded seriously. "He cries sometimes. At night, when he thinks I'm asleep." Martha's heart ached. She reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Emily's ear. "It's okay to cry." "That's what I tell him," Emily said. "But he says men don't cry." "Men cry," Martha said firmly. "Anyone who loves deeply cries when they lose someone." Emily looked up at her with wide, solemn eyes. "Did you cry when Mr. James died?" Martha nodded. "Every day." "Do you still?" "Sometimes." Emily reached out and took Martha's hand. Her fingers were small, dirt-streaked, warm. "It's okay. Papa says crying makes the flowers grow." Martha couldn't hold it back anymore. She pulled Emily into a hug, tears streaming down her face. The little girl wrapped her arms around Martha's neck and held tight. "It's okay," Emily whispered. "You're not alone anymore." When Daniel came around the corner and saw them, he stopped. His chest tightened. He hadn't seen Emily hold someone like that since her mother died. And Martha, this woman the town mocked and dismissed, held his daughter like she was made of something precious. Daniel cleared his throat. "We should head back." Emily pulled away reluctantly. "Can I come visit again?" Martha wiped her eyes quickly. "Anytime you'd like." "Tomorrow?" Emily asked hopefully. Martha glanced at Daniel. He nodded once. "Tomorrow," Martha agreed. As they climbed into the wagon, Emily waved until they disappeared around the bend. Martha stood in her garden, dirt on her knees, tears drying on her cheeks. And for the first time in 3 years, her cabin didn't feel quite so empty. That evening, Martha walked into town to buy flour. She needed to bake bread, something she'd been putting off for weeks. But now, with the thought of Emily's visit tomorrow, she wanted to have something to offer. The general store was busy. Women clustered near the fabric table, their voices low but sharp. Martha felt their eyes on her the moment she walked in. She kept her head down, moving quickly to the back where the dry goods were shelved. "Well, look who decided to show her face," a voice said behind her. Martha turned. Mrs. Calloway stood there, arms crossed, lips pursed. She was the butcher's wife, known for her sharp tongue and long memory. "Mrs. Calloway," Martha said evenly. "Heard you had a visitor this morning," the woman said. "Daniel Hayes." Martha's stomach dropped. Of course someone had seen. Of course it had already spread. "He was fixing my fence," Martha said. Mrs. Calloway raised an eyebrow. "Is that what they're calling it now?" Heat flooded Martha's face. It was a kindness. Nothing more. "Kindness," Mrs. Calloway repeated, her tone dripping with disbelief. "A widower and a widow, alone at her cabin. You know what people will say." "Let them say it," Martha said, voice trembling but firm. Mrs. Calloway's eyes narrowed. "You think you can just waltz back into society wearing that ridiculous dress, crying over a man who's been dead 3 years, and now latch onto the first man who shows you attention?" Martha's hands clenched. "I'm not latching onto anyone." "Then what do you call it?" Mrs. Calloway stepped closer. "Daniel Hayes is a good man. His daughter deserves better than someone like you." The words hit like a slap. Martha stood frozen, her throat burning, her vision blurring. "Someone like me?" Martha whispered. "Yes," Mrs. Calloway said coldly. "Someone who's let herself go. Someone who can't move on. Someone who's become a burden to this town." Martha felt the walls closing in. The other women had stopped talking. They were watching now. Listening. Judging. She turned and walked out of the store without buying anything. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Martha walked quickly, her breath coming in short gasps. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of town, where the road stretched out toward open country. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady herself. A burden. That's what she'd become. She thought about Daniel's kindness, about Emily's innocent affection, and she realized with crushing certainty that Mrs. Calloway was right about one thing. People would talk, and their talk would follow Daniel and Emily like a shadow. Martha couldn't let that happen. She couldn't ruin them the way she'd been ruined. When she got home, she sat at her small table and wrote a note. Her handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. Mr. Hayes, thank you for your kindness, but I cannot accept any more visits. Please give Emily my regards. Me. She folded it carefully and set it on the table. Tomorrow, she would leave it at the Hayes Ranch on her way to somewhere, anywhere. Maybe it was time to leave Montana, to start over where no one knew her name or her grief. But that night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, all she could hear was Emily's voice. You're not alone anymore. And for the first time, Martha wasn't sure she had the strength to walk away. Martha woke before dawn, the note still sitting on her table. She dressed quickly, pinned her hair and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. The morning air was cold. Frost covered the grass in a thin silver blanket. She tucked the note into her pocket and started walking toward the Hayes Ranch. 3 miles. She'd give them the note, say goodbye, and keep walking. When she crested the hill overlooking the Hayes property, she stopped. The ranch was modest but well kept. Smoke curled from the chimney. Chickens scratched in the yard. It looked like a home. Martha's chest ached. But when she reached the porch, the door opened before she could knock. Daniel stood there, coffee cup in hand. Martha, you're here early. I came to give you this. She fumbled for the note. Daniel read it slowly. When he looked up, his eyes were steady. You're leaving. It's for the best, Martha said quickly. People are talking. I won't let my presence ruin your reputation. He folded the note and handed it back. Keep it. What? I don't care what people say, Daniel said, and I won't let their talk drive you away. You don't understand. They'll make your life miserable, Emily's life. Daniel stepped onto the porch. They talked when my wife died, said I couldn't raise Emily alone. I didn't listen then. I'm not listening now. Martha looked down. Her hands trembled. Stay, Daniel said quietly. Not for me, not for Emily, for yourself. Before Martha could respond, the door burst open. Emily stood there in her nightgown, hair wild. Miss Martha. She threw her arms around Martha's waist. You came. I knew you would. Martha's eyes burned. Emily pulled back. Are you staying for breakfast? Papa made pancakes. Martha laughed. It came out choked but real. I'd like that. Inside, the kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee and sweet batter. Daniel served pancakes while Emily chattered about a dream where Martha lived in a castle made of flowers. Martha ate slowly. For the first time in years, she was sitting at a table with people who wanted her there. After breakfast, Emily insisted Martha come see the new calf. They walked to the barn together, Emily's hand tucked into Martha's. Papa named her Clover, Emily said. But I think she looks more like Daisy. Martha smiled. Why didn't you tell him? Because he gets sad when I argue. They reached the barn. Inside, the calf stood on wobbly legs. Emily climbed onto the fence. See? She's pretty, Emily said. Like you. Martha's throat closed. You keep saying that. Because it's true, Emily said simply. Grown-ups forget true things, so I remind them. When they returned to the house, Daniel was waiting by the wagon. I need to go into town, he said. Pick up supplies. You're welcome to come. Martha hesitated. People will see us together. Daniel met her eyes. Let them see. Emily tugged on Martha's sleeve. Please come. I'll hold your hand. Martha looked at Emily's hopeful face, then at Daniel's steady gaze. Maybe it was time to stop running. All right, Martha said quietly. I'll come. The ride into town was quiet. Emily sat between them, swinging her legs. Martha's hands were folded tightly in her lap. When they rolled down Main Street, heads turned. Martha felt every stare, but Daniel didn't flinch. He guided the wagon to the general store and offered his hand to Martha. She took it. Inside the store, silence fell. Mrs. Calloway stood near the counter. 2 other women turned, expressions shifting to disdain. Daniel walked to the back, Emily skipping beside him. Martha stood frozen near the door. Mrs. Calloway approached slowly. Well, well, I see you didn't take my advice. I don't need your advice, Martha said. But Daniel Hayes does. Someone should tell him what kind of woman you are. And what kind is that? The kind who clings to any man who shows her pity. The words hit like stones. A small voice cut through the tension. That's not true. Everyone turned. Emily stood in the middle of the store, fists clenched, face red. Miss Martha is kind and pretty and she doesn't cling to anyone. Emily, Daniel said quietly. But Emily wasn't finished. You're mean, all of you. You made her cry at church and you're trying to make her cry again. Mrs. Calloway's face flushed. Young lady, you don't speak to adults that way. Then adults shouldn't be mean. Emily shot back. Martha's eyes burned. She knelt beside Emily. It's okay, sweetheart. You don't have to fight for me. Yes, I do, Emily said fiercely. Because you're my friend, and friends don't let people be mean. Daniel placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. He looked at Mrs. Calloway, expression cold. We're done here, he said. He paid for the supplies without another word. Then he took Emily's hand, nodded to Martha, and walked out. Martha followed, legs shaking. Outside, Emily was still fuming. I don't like her. I know, Daniel said. She's a bully. She is. Emily looked up at Martha. Are you okay? Martha knelt and pulled the little girl into a hug. I'm more than okay. Thank you for standing up for me. Emily hugged her back tightly. That's what families do. Martha's breath caught. Families. When they climbed back into the wagon, Daniel glanced at Martha. You all right? Martha nodded slowly. I think so. But as they rode out of town, she realized something had shifted. She wasn't running anymore. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe what Emily had been saying all along, that she was worth fighting for. 3 days later, the fire started. It began in the dry goods storage behind the general store. Someone had knocked over a lantern. Within minutes, flames were climbing the wooden walls, licking toward the roof. The bell rang out across town. Sharp, urgent, panicked. Martha was at the Hayes Ranch when she heard it. She'd been helping Emily with her letters, tracing words in the dirt with a stick. Daniel was mending harnesses nearby. They all looked up at once. Fire, Daniel said. Already moving. He grabbed a canvas bag and threw it into the wagon. Stay here with Emily. No, Martha said, standing quickly. I'm coming. Daniel paused. Martha, I'm coming, she repeated firmly. He studied her face for a brief moment, then nodded. Get in. They rode hard into town. Smoke rose in thick black columns against the afternoon sky. People were running, shouting, forming bucket lines from the well to the burning building. Daniel jumped down before the wagon even stopped. Martha climbed down after him, her skirts tangling briefly before she ripped them free. Women to the well, someone shouted. Men to the buckets. Martha ran toward the well, joining the line of women passing buckets. Her arms burned with the effort. Water sloshed over her dress, soaking her through. But she didn't stop. The fire roared louder. The heat was suffocating. Then someone screamed. There's a child inside. The bucket line froze. Faces turned toward the burning building. Through the smoke-filled window, a small figure could be seen, pressed against the glass. Whose child? Someone yelled. The widow Patterson's boy. He was playing in the alley. Men stood paralyzed. The doorway was engulfed in flames. The roof groaned, threatening to collapse. No one moved. Martha didn't think. She dropped her bucket and ran. Martha, no! Daniel's voice cut through the chaos. But she was already at the door. She grabbed a wet blanket from the ground, threw it over her head and shoulders, and plunged inside. The smoke was instant, choking. Her eyes streamed. Her lungs screamed for clean air. She dropped low, moving forward on instinct, feeling her way through the heat. Hello? She called, voice hoarse. Where are you? A small sob answered her. She followed the sound, crawling over fallen shelves, through burning debris. She found him huddled in the corner, clutching a wooden horse. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Come here, sweetheart, Martha gasped. I've got you. The boy reached for her. She wrapped the blanket around both of them and lifted him. He was heavier than she expected, but adrenaline flooded her body. She turned back toward where she thought the door was. But the smoke was too thick. She couldn't see. Her lungs burned. Her legs shook. Then a shape appeared through the smoke. A man's silhouette. Strong arms reached for her. Daniel. He took the boy from her arms and pulled her toward the exit. They stumbled out together just as the roof groaned one final time. They collapsed on the ground, coughing, gasping. Someone threw water over them. Hands pulled them back, away from the building. Martha lay on her back, chest heaving, staring up at the sky. Her dress was scorched, her hands blistered, but the boy was alive. His mother rushed forward, sobbing, scooping him into her arms. "Oh, thank God, thank God." People crowded around, voices overlapped. She went in after him. She could have died. "Did you see that?" Martha pushed herself up slowly. Her vision swam. Daniel knelt beside her, his face streaked with soot, his eyes fierce. "Are you insane?" he said, voice rough. "You could have been killed. The boy is alive because you're a damn fool." Daniel's hands gripped her shoulders. "Not hard, but desperate. Don't you ever do that again." Martha met his eyes. "I had to." "No, you didn't," Daniel said. "But you did anyway." Behind them, the crowd had gone silent. Mrs. Calloway stood at the edge, her face pale, her expression unreadable. The widow Patterson approached slowly, her son clinging to her neck. "Miss Ellison," she said, voice trembling. "You saved my boy." Martha shook her head. "Anyone would have." "No," the widow interrupted. "They wouldn't have. They stood there, but you ran in." Tears streamed down the woman's face. She reached out and took Martha's burned hand gently. "Thank you." Martha's throat closed. She nodded, unable to speak. One by one, people stepped forward, not with words, but with small gestures. A nod, a hand on the shoulder, a quiet, "Thank you." Even Mrs. Calloway approached. She didn't apologize, but she said, voice low, "That was brave." It wasn't much, but it was something. Daniel helped Martha to her feet. She swayed, and he steadied her. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "Good, because we're getting you home." He guided her to the wagon where Emily waited, her face streaked with tears. The little girl threw her arms around Martha the moment she climbed up. "I was so scared," Emily sobbed. Martha held her close, stroking her hair. "I'm all right, sweetheart. I promise." Daniel climbed into the driver's seat. His jaw was tight. His hands gripped the reins too hard. They rode in silence until they reached Martha's cabin. Daniel helped her down, then scooped her up before she could protest. "Daniel, I can walk?" "Stop talking," he said. He carried her inside and set her carefully on the chair by the fireplace. Emily hovered nearby, her eyes wide. Daniel knelt and examined Martha's hands. The blisters were red, angry. He disappeared briefly and returned with a jar of salve. He worked in silence, his touch surprisingly gentle. Martha watched his face, the hard line of his jaw, the concentration in his eyes, the way his hands trembled just slightly. "You're angry," Martha said softly. "Yes, because I went into the fire. Because you could have died," Daniel said, not looking up, "and I would have been too late to stop you." Martha's breath caught. "Daniel." He finally met her eyes. "I've already lost one person I cared about. I can't." His voice broke. "I can't do that again." The air between them shifted. Martha's heart pounded. "You care about me?" Daniel's hands stilled. He didn't answer with words. He just looked at her. Raw, open, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. Emily, sensing the weight of the moment, quietly slipped outside. Martha's voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't think anyone could care about me again. Not like this." "Then you weren't paying attention," Daniel said. He stood but didn't step away. He stayed close. Too close. Close enough that Martha could see the soot still smudged on his cheek, the way his chest rose and fell. "I'm not James," Daniel said. "I can't be him." "I don't want you to be," Martha replied. "And I'm not asking you to forget him." "I know." Daniel exhaled slowly. "But I am asking you to let me stay. To let Emily stay. To let us be part of your life." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "What if I ruin it? What if I'm too much?" Daniel reached out and cupped her face gently. "You're not too much, you're exactly enough." And then slowly he leaned down and kissed her forehead. Soft, reverent, a promise more than anything else. When he pulled back, Martha was crying, but this time, they were good tears. Outside, Emily peeked through the window and grinned. 6 months later, the wildflowers bloomed thick across the Montana hills. Martha stood at the edge of her garden watching Daniel repair the chicken coop while Emily chased butterflies through the tall grass. The little girl's laughter rang clear and bright, a sound that had become as familiar as breathing. The cabin looked different now. Curtains hung in the windows, flowers lined the pathway, the fence stood straight and strong. But the biggest change was in Martha herself. She no longer walked with her shoulders hunched. Her dresses fit better, not because she'd lost weight, but because she carried herself differently. Proudly, like a woman who knew her worth. "Miss Martha," Emily called, running over with a fistful of daisies. "Look what I found." "They're beautiful, sweetheart," Martha said, kneeling to examine the flowers. "Perfect for the dinner table." "Is Papa staying for dinner again?" Emily asked hopefully. Martha smiled. "If he wants to." "He always wants to," Emily said with a giggle. It was true. Daniel had been taking most of his meals at Martha's cabin, not because she needed the company anymore, but because they all chose to be together. The town had slowly warmed to their arrangement. After the fire, people saw Martha differently. Mrs. Calloway still kept her distance, but she no longer spoke against her. Others nodded when they passed on the street. Some even smiled. But what mattered most was this: Martha had stopped caring what they thought. As the sun began to set, Daniel finished his work and walked toward them. His sleeves were rolled up, his face dusty, but his eyes were warm. "Dinner ready?" he asked. "Almost," Martha replied. Emily picked flowers for the table. Daniel smiled and ruffled his daughter's hair. "Did she now? Well, we'd better put them in water." Inside, they moved around each other with easy familiarity. Daniel washed his hands while Martha ladled stew into bowls. Emily arranged her flowers in a mason jar, tongue poking out in concentration. They sat at the small table, heads bowed while Daniel said grace. But when Martha looked up, she caught him watching her instead of closing his eyes. After dinner, Emily curled up on the rug with a book while Daniel and Martha cleaned dishes. Their hands brushed as she handed him the plates to dry. Small touches. Comfortable. "Right. Emily asked me something today," Daniel said quietly. "What's that?" "She wanted to know when you're going to marry me." Martha nearly dropped the pot she was washing. "What did you tell her?" "That I haven't asked you yet." Martha's breath caught. She turned slowly. Daniel was setting down the towel, his expression serious but gentle. "Are you?" Martha whispered. "Going to ask, I mean." Daniel stepped closer. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you'd say yes." Martha's hands were still soapy. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. "I don't know if I'm ready to be a wife again." "I'm not asking you to be a wife," Daniel said. "I'm asking you to be my wife." The distinction landed soft and sure. Martha looked past him to where Emily sat reading, her small body curved against the hearth. Then she looked back at Daniel, this man who had fixed her fence in her heart with the same steady hands. "Yes," Martha said simply. Daniel's face broke into a smile. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band, not new but polished to a warm shine. "It was my mother's," he said. "I know it's not much €1." "It's perfect," Martha interrupted. He slipped it onto her finger. It fit like it had been waiting for her all along. Emily looked up from her book. "Did Papa ask you to marry him?" "He did," Martha said, laughing through tears. Emily squealed and launched herself at them both. They caught her in their arms, the three of them pressed together in the warm circle of lamplight. The wedding was simple. They stood in the same chapel where Martha had once been mocked, but this time she wore a new dress, cream-colored and fitted, with tiny pearl buttons. Emily stood beside her in a pink dress, holding a bouquet of wild flowers. The townspeople filled the pews. Some had come out of curiosity, but most came with genuine warmth. Even Mrs. Calloway attended, sitting stiff-backed in the third row. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, silence filled the space. Then a small voice piped up. "I object to waiting any longer," Emily announced. "They love each other." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even Martha giggled behind her bouquet. When Daniel kissed his bride, Emily cheered the loudest of all. Later, as they drove home in the decorated wagon, Emily dozed between them. The setting sun painted everything gold. "No regrets?" Daniel asked quietly. Martha looked at him, this good man who had seen past her grief to the woman beneath. Then she looked at Emily, the little girl who had called her beautiful when no one else would. "None," Martha said. "Not a single one." The wagon rolled through the Montana evening, carrying a family bound not by obligation but by choice. Behind them the church bells rang out across the valley, their sound no longer mournful but joyful. And in the small cabin at the end of the dirt road, 3 places were set at the table, ready for all the dinners yet to come.